then parathyroid hormone, vitamin D. And so to start with calcium physiology, the calcium which is in our body, 99% is in the form of calcium hydroxyapatite in bone, and only 1% which is available in the circulation. And those 1%, around 50% is bound to albumin and phosphate. Means 40% is with albumin, and the rest 10% is with phosphate and other anions. And only this 50% is our ionic calcium, which is available for the metabolism. So here what happens, it is dependent on pH. So if there is alkalosis, so what happens, the binding of calcium with albumin, it binds vividly with albumin, and there is less ionic calcium which is available. So in the condition wherever there is alkalosis, like in cases of hyperventilation, or patient in CKD where there is bicarbonate had been given. So what happens, the overall ionic calcium level gets down and there is hypocalcemia. So basically calcium, there are three main organs which play important role in calcium homeostasis, where bone actually regulates as acute regulation, and gut and kidney, these are for chronic regulation. And there are three hormones like parathyroid hormones, calcitonin and calcitriol. These three chemicals, biochemicals, which are main importance, has got main importance in calcium homeostasis. In those, PTH, parathyroid hormone, is the main. Along with that, the calcium sensing receptor, which are present in parathyroid gland, has got the main role in calcium homeostasis. So here the effect of PTH, calcitriol and calcitonin on various factors like calcium, phosphate and urine calcium. So parathyroid hormone, L-calcium, when it is high, it increases calcium in our body, while calcitonin decreases it. The effect of PTH on parathyroid, this phosphate, is to decrease overall phosphate level by increasing renal excretion of it, while calcitonin and calcitriol increase it. Calcitriol by increasing gut absorption of phosphate. Similarly, urine calcium level is decreased by parathyroid hormone and calcitriol, while it is increased because of this calcitonin. But mind you, here calcitonin plays a very little role in calcium homeostasis. So what happens when we talk about fetal physiology, here the maternal to fetal calcium gradient is high in fetus side. So the passage of calcium from mother to fetus has to be active through active transport, where TRPV5 and TRPV6 along with calcium ATPase, these channels plays important role in the to pass calcium from mother to fetus under influence of parathyroid. That happens mostly in third trimester. That is why those babies who are born preterm are basically prone to have hypocalcemia. Okay, so I've talked already about this. The gradient is higher side in fetus, so the transport has to be active. In mother, the calcium is being, the level is maintained by parathyroid hormone related peptide along with calcitriol, and this in fetus the PTH axis is well established. So any change happens here will affect here. So if suppose mother is having hypocalcemia, there will be affection of this on fetus also. So what happens after birth when there is no placenta? So when there is PTH is high, suppose, so and after birth, what happens? The calcium level ultimately, in spite of having the this parathyroid axis intact in fetus just after birth, the newborns are bound to get hypocalcemic. The nadir happens at 24 hours in hours, which is more in preterm than term. So the role of calcium in our body is it increases bone strength, and it is important for nerve conduction, and it is also important for this conduction in cardiac muscles along with the contractility. It is important for enzyme release, and it is also important for ADH action in kidneys along with motility of gut. Now, various levels and the manifestations, the symptoms. So here, at the level of 8 to 12 around, which is the normal level, 8.6 to 12, the patient is asymptomatic. But as the calcium level decreases, initially there is jitteriness followed by tetany, then patient goes into apnea, and finally there is seizure. While in hypercalcemic side, if it is more than 13, initially there is irritability. After that there is polyuria and hypertension, sometimes benign intracranial hypertension also, and there is dehydration, and ultimately patient goes into encephalopathy. So now how to take and how to send the serum calcium. So always take samples in fasting level, but always ensure the normal albumin level, because it will be low if you assess total calcium, it will be low in hypoalbuminemia. In that case, the ionized calcium plays a role for diagnosis, and it will be high in total calcium will be high in wherever there is the protein level is high, particularly in nephrotic syndrome where there is low albumin level. So overall calcium level will be low, but we have to check for ionized calcium. This is the corrected when these conditions are there, we have to check for corrected calcium. So the formula is measured calcium plus 4 minus albumin into 0.8 milligram per deciliter when we are taking the measurement in milligram per deciliter, and when we are taking in millimole per liter, the formula is measured calcium plus 40 minus albumin into 0.02 millimole per liter. Now there is different cutoffs for different age groups, like in preterm less than 1500 grams, more than 1500 gram, and postnatally. So after postnatal period, this 8.6 to 12 milligram per deciliter is the normal value, total calcium normal value, while ionic calcium is 4.6 to 7 milligram per deciliter. So we have to remember these cutoffs value, and we have to see the clinical scenario along with this all patient age related cutoff values. Phosphorus we have to send in morning fasting level, because when the patient takes breakfast, high carbohydrate level changes the phosphorus level, so you may not get the actual phosphorus. So, and important thing is also that the phosphorus is basically intracellular thing. So whenever you apply tourniquet and take a squeeze sample, it will be spuriously high. Along with that, age specific level we have to keep in mind, because in pediatric age group the level is quite different. So in infancy it is 5 to 8 milligram per deciliter. We often remember 4 to 6 in children, while it is low in adulthood. Now when we talk about alkaline phosphatase, we take the serum sample, and it is important because alkaline phosphatase is the marker of bone formation. So whenever there is like conditions of rickets or the patient of rickets who are undergoing treatment, so the alkaline phosphatase level will be very high. But wherever there is like immobility or hypophosphatasia, the level will be very high, very low, because the bone formation is not happening. Similarly, it will be very high in hyperthyroidism because of bone desorption. Now we have to remember the level in children, because in adult the level is very low. So for the sake of remembering, in children we have to remember 200 to 600 international unit per liter. Whenever we are dealing with calcium hypocalcemia, we have always to do magnesium in initial stages of investigation. Timing is morning fasting, but we have to keep this precaution that it is also an intra cellular thing, so we don't have to squeeze or we don't have to apply tourniquet. So level is, to remember, it is 1.5 to 2.5 milligram per deciliter. Parath hormone, we often do intact parath hormone, and the indications are wherever there is low calcium along with high phosphate. Okay. So wherever the parath hormone is high, okay. Yes, indication like low calcium and high phosphate, or there is high calcium to rule out hyperparathyroidism, or in the setting of rickets with high phosphate or low phosphate. But the precautions we have to take is that it is highly unstable. We have always to take samples and we have to transfer the samples in ice, and we have to immediately process the sample. And we nowadays do intact PTH because it is relatively stable than the PTH itself. Level is 10 to 70 picomole per liter per ml, and it should always be read in context with calcium. So the interpretation of parath hormone is like whenever there is calcium low, so PTH, if there is low PTH, it is always hypoparathyroidism. Even if the level is normal, means if the level is normal, PTH level is normal and calcium is also low, it is always, we should think about hypoparathyroidism. But wherever the setting is that the calcium level is low, but PTH is high, ideally what should be the PTH, if the low calcium, we should, when we are thinking about hypoparathyroidism, the level should be low. But if it is high, that means there is some sort of secondary hyperparathyroidism because of low level of calcium. So it is stimulating calcium receptor in parathyroid, so that there is release of parathyroid hormone. So it is secondary hyperparathyroidism. And if the calcium level is high and PTH is high, no doubt it is hyperparathyroidism. And even all in this conditions of normal PTH also, if the calcium is high, we should always suspect hyperparathyroidism. Now, vitamin D assessment, the indications are wherever there is hypocalcemia along with low phosphate, because vitamin D is important for the absorption of calcium along with phosphate also in GI system. So wherever there is hypocalcemia and low phosphate, we should go for vitamin D assessment. Okay, so in the setting of nutritional rickets, we have to assess for 25 hydroxy vitamin D, and the level is 20 to 50 nanogram per ml or 50 to 150 nanomole per liter.
Include Dr. Pradeep, who is already given a wonderful talk, Dr. Sonal Shah, who is a dynamic consultant and professor at Jamnagar, and she has been part of our team for the last 2 years, and she has been really very dynamic in terms of propagating pediatric endocrinology in the region. And I'm really happy to have Dr. Chetan Dave and Dr. Neha, who have been our fellows, and now they are working in Rajkot and Dehradun with this regard. So both of them are there, and now we are joined by Dr. Riddhi, who has just finished a fellowship yesterday. We will take us forward with regards to that. So welcome all of you, and Dr. Riddhi, you can start the presentation.
So we'll start with this case, the 4-month-old boy, the known case of nephrotic syndrome, and his calcium level was 7.2, which was detected as incidental finding on routine workup. There was no symptoms of hypocalcemia. So Dr. Neha, is this hypocalcemia or what else?
Thank you, Dr. Riddhi, for discussing the case. So as we can see that this 4-month-old boy is a diagnosed case of nephrotic syndrome and is asymptomatic, which points towards the possibility of a pseudo hypocalcemia. For this, the first step in evaluation would be to see for the level of albumin. And if the albumin level is low, we need to correct it for the level of low albumin. And as Dr. Pradeep has very nicely highlighted in his talk, the formula to correct the albumin, the calcium for the level of albumin. The albumin in this boy was 2 grams per liter, which gave us the corrected calcium of 8.8. So this is normal for this child. So the key messages from this case are that we should always correct the level of calcium for the albumin. And second, if possible, we should always get the ionized calcium. In some settings, ionized calcium may not be possible. In those cases, we can always use the corrected calcium level by getting a total calcium as well as the albumin level. Thank you.
So this is the second case of 4-year-old girl with history of tetany and ionic calcium level was 3.91. So Dr. Pradeep has already mentioned that age cutoff level of the ionic calcium. So in infancy less than 4, in childhood less than 4.4, and in adulthood or adolescence less than 4.6 is considered as hypocalcemia. Her phosphorus level was 8.4 and PTH was 130. So based on hypocalcium and high phosphorus, PTH was advised and which was higher. So and she was diagnosed with pseudo-hypoparathyroidism. So Sonal ma'am, do you agree with this diagnosis of PTH?
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Riddhi. Yeah, so the 4-year-old girl with having ionic calcium of 3.1 and phosphorus of 8.4 should always suspect us for the hyperparathyroidism. But before, you should think of calcium etiology when the patient presents with seizures, cardiac failure, or intracranial calcification, or unexplained cataract, or in very young age where they present with a stridor, or raised intracranial calcium, okay, raised intracranial pressure. But in this child, next slide please. Yeah. But in this child, after once you detect the hypocalcemia, first after correcting the calcium, as we say, as we have seen in the previous slide case, first we have to do is high creatinine level, because low calcium and high phosphorus can be present even in case of chronic kidney disease. So we must rule out chronic kidney disease whenever you have low calcium and high phosphorus before going for parathormone level. So in this child, we did the creatinine level and it was 2.4 milligram per deciliter. Next please. So the key message is always do creatinine level first before doing the parathormone level in case when there is a hypocalcemia with hyperphosphatemia, and PTH to be done only if the creatinine is normal. Thank you.
This is the 10-year-old boy with seizure and ionic calcium of 2.1 and phosphorus is normal. The PTH is also in normal range, and there was no response to IV calcium. So, Dr. Ketan, why this boy is not responding to IV calcium?
Thank you, Dr. Riddhi. Good afternoon, everybody. So, despite giving IV calcium properly, that is 1 to 2 ml per kg of bolus over 15 to 20 minutes with cardiac monitoring. If still there is no response and seizures are continuing, then definitely we should think in terms of magnesium. And as we know that magnesium is responsible for the release of PTH. So despite giving calcium appropriately, if seizures are continuing, then definitely we should send magnesium level, and as well as we can give magnesium IM 0.5 ml, 0.2 ml per kg of 50% magnesium sulfate. So in this case, magnesium turned out to be low. So definitely we should treat hypomagnesemia by giving IM magnesium sulfate injection and later on by supplementing with the oral magnesium.
So the
key message again, in case of refractory hypocalcemic seizure, we should think of magnesium before thinking of anything else. Thank you.
So the 3-month-old girl presented with seizure and ionic calcium of 3.2 milligram per deciliter and phosphorus is lower, is also on the lower side, and PTH is also lower side. So low calcium, low phosphorus and low PTH. Based on this finding, she was diagnosed with hypoparathyroidism and referred to us for the lifelong treatment of calcium and calcium. So Dr. Pradeep, do you agree with this diagnosis of hypoparathyroidism in this 3-month-old girl?
I think Pradeep is not there. So I think the big message out here is that we expect that anybody who has hypoparathyroidism should have a high phosphorus. If your phosphorus is low, it means your PTH is working. So why does that girl have a low PTH? This becomes the big question to ask. And Dr. Pradeep had very nicely said that in situations if you're not taking PTH properly, if you keep them there, if it is there allowed to be there, it will be degraded, labile hormone. So basically what we need to understand is that we expect low phosphorus in a vitamin D related cause and not a PTH related cause. So vitamin D was low. When we did a proper PTH, again it was found to be normal. So again, be wary as a pediatrician to not do PTH in a lab which is just a collection center. They will take the sample and that sample will stay there for a long time, which will be degraded, and that could be a problem. So the key message basically here is that transport PTH on ice. Low phosphorus is against PTH deficiency as a cause, and that's the big message we like to give.
So the next case is 1 week old boy presented with seizure with ionic calcium of 2.4 and phosphorus is high. His creatinine is normal, 0.3 milligram per deciliter. So, Sonal ma'am, what is your approach in this boy?
Yeah. So this is a 1 week old boy with ionic calcium low and high phosphorus. So it definitely projects towards we make us think about the hypoparathyroidism. But since the child is a 1 week old boy, so we must look for the cardiac defects also, because it may be a part of the DiGeorge syndrome. So in this case, we did the like a parathormone level. It turned out to be low, that is 2 picogram per ml, and we have to screen for the cardiac defect also, because so low calcium and high phosphorus with low PTH in a neonate, we must think of neonatal hypoparathyroidism and suspecting and we must screen for cardiac defect for DiGeorge syndrome. So key message is high phosphorus always suggests the PTH defect, and cardiac evaluation in newborn is must when there is a hypoparathyroidism to rule out DiGeorge syndrome.
So this is the 10-year-old boy and presented with seizure and ionic calcium of 3.1. So as a part of workup of seizure, the CT scan was advised and which showed the intracranial calcification. So Dr. Neha, what other thing you suspect in the physical examination, and what is the further plan of assessment for this boy?
So what we can see here is that patient presented with a complaint of seizures which were uncontrolled on normal anti-epileptic therapy. On evaluation, he had a hypocalcemia with ionic calcium of 3.1, and somebody performed this radioimaging which showed intracranial calcifications. So given the scenario, possibility of pseudo-hypoparathyroidism increases, and when we clinically examined this boy, he was noted to have cataract. Also, he had this brachymetacarpia, as Dr. Anurag sir has already explained how to evaluate, subcutaneous calcinosis, and also if we go by the level of algorithm which Dr. Pradeep has already discussed, the phosphorus level were very high in this case. So there was low calcium with high phosphorus. So one need to evaluate the possibility of chronic kidney disease by evaluating creatinine, which was normal. So we are left with the evaluation of PTH level, which was very high. So even in the presence of such a high PTH, the phosphorus was high and calcium was low, which gives us the final diagnosis of pseudo-hypoparathyroidism. Thank you.
So I think the very big message is that when we deal with a lot of these patients with what is known as seizures or epilepsy, at least do a calcium level. Many times we get this from neurologists who get a PTH scan and they refer to us. While a pediatrician should actually do a calcium at every seizures, whether it is acute or I would say even chronic in that regard. So this is very important. And if you see intracranial calcification with hypocalcemia, do a PTH. That's extremely important. And of course, look for pseudo-hypoparathyroidism as well in that regard.
So this 3-week-old boy, the case of the rickets, and he was given a tablet of the 60,000 IU vitamin D, and he presented with bone pain. And ALP was raised. Initially, ALP was around 800 to 900, and now it is increased to 1100. And calcium was normal. So somebody did the diagnosis of refractory rickets because of the rise in ALP. So Dr. Chetan, do you agree this?
First of all, the diagnosis of refractory rickets is based on no response in X-ray after 2 adequate doses of proper vitamin D along with the calcium. So in this case, only one dose of vitamin D, one proper course of vitamin D is given. Plus, I haven't seen the X-ray. But let me tell you that in case of healing, ALP can rise, as well as bone pain can also be there due to hungry bone syndrome. And in this X-ray, we can very well see that the line of healing in form of bright red at the end of the metaphysis is visible. So definitely this is a healing rickets, and bone pain is due to hungry bone syndrome. So we should adequately supplement calcium along with the vitamin D as well. So this is called normal response, and I will not call this as a refractory rickets at all.
So the key messages are that if your bone pain increases, ALP increases, it is not a refractory rickets. It's a normal response, as Dr. Chetan very well said. Look at X-ray and wait for at least 6 weeks to look for the X-ray. Don't do it hurriedly. Now we talk about daily therapy or we talk about weekly therapy. Minimum 6 to 8 weeks what is required in that.
So the 4-year-old girl with the rickets, and she was advised to calcium 5 ml, which contain around 400 IU of vitamin D. And there was no improvement. 30 days later, the X-ray was advised, which showed no line of healing. And after that, she was labeled as refractory rickets and referred to us. So, Dr. Pradeep, do you agree with this diagnosis? I think
No. We cannot say refractory rickets unless we complete the treatment. And here we are giving osteocalcium, which is merely having 150 milligram per 5 ml of calcium and 200 international unit of vitamin D. When we see this, the guideline from our country itself, Khadilkar et al., what we see here in ages of 1 to 18 years, the treatment dose is either 3,000 to 6,000 international unit per day or 60,000 international unit weekly for 6 weeks. I am talking about vitamin D, and calcium it is around 600 to 8.
So I think clearly what we see is that this is an inadequate treatment which was given. So we should not label everybody as refractory rickets, because you need to evaluate a lot in that perspective. And if somebody is having malabsorption, then only you should think of parenteral vitamin D. I think that's what Dr. Pradeep is wanting to say. And this is inadequate treatment. So Dr. Pradeep, are you there? So the key message is refractory rickets is only after you look at lack of radiological response despite adequate treatment, and line of healing is the most important. Now next case, Dr. Pradeep.
So this 4-year-old girl with rickets, and she had received the 2 adequate courses of vitamin D. There was no improvement, and so this is clearly the refractory rickets, and she had abdominal pain and anemia. So Sonal ma'am, what could be the cause of refractory rickets?
This child has received 2 courses of vitamin D and still there is no signs of improvement on X-ray. This definitely shows the refractory rickets, but this child also shows abdominal pain and anemia. So we have to suspect malabsorption in this case, because vitamin D might not have been absorbed properly. So when you should suspect celiac disease, and you should go for TTG line wherever you have a patient complaining of abdominal pain, anemia, pica, constipation, growth failure. So before labeling it as a vitamin D non-responsive rickets, we must do TTG level, and in this case TTG level turned out to be 200. And then we should go for duodenal biopsy, and here the treatment of choice will be parenteral vitamin D. So always consider, key messages, consider malabsorption whenever you have refractory rickets, rickets not responding to 2 courses of vitamin D, and when there is anemia, gastrointestinal symptoms, urinary symptoms, pica, and other constipation, etc. So always consider malabsorption in these cases.
Okay, so the next case is 5-year-old girl with rickets and polyuria, and this is a photograph of girl showing the genoverum, and the weight was 10 kg, height was 88 centimeter, and pH, her VVG was done, showed the metabolic acidosis of the base excess of -12, and urine pH was more than 5.3. So based on this finding, she was diagnosed with distal RTA. So Dr. Pradeep, do you agree with this diagnosis without any finding of the anion gap or any glomerular function? Distal RTA.
No, So first we go with the algorithm. We didn't do creatinine level here, so we have to go for creatinine and show me what is the creatinine and KFT and all values.
So creatinine was 2 and phosphorus was high. So what do you think, Dr. Pradeep, now?
Okay, so whenever there is phosphorus is high.
I think we are losing Dr. Pradeep again. So if the phosphorus is high, it has to be renal failure you have to evaluate. And very importantly, RTA is a tubular problem. So you have to exclude glomerular problem before you go ahead and rush a diagnosis. And CKD is much more common than RTA.
Yes.
So Dr. Pradeep, I think you agree with that we should rule out kidney failure in this case. So the key messages I think are that high phosphorus and rickets suggest chronic kidney disease. Next case, Dr. Pradeep.
12-year-old girl with history of
With
history of multiple fractures, and on examination.
The weather is not good, so.
No worries, Dr. Pradeep.
Okay. On examination, this girl had anterior bowing of tibia bilaterally and X-ray suggestive of marked osteopenia and thin cortex. And she had history of failure to thrive. She was too thin and lean, and she had polyuria, myopathy, plus history of the recurrent neck flop. So, Dr. Neha, what will be the further line of approach for this girl?
So keeping in mind the clinical picture that this girl presented with, that is multiple fractures, failure to thrive, polyuria and myopathy, the first step in the evaluation would be to have a complete calcium profile consisting of calcium, phosphorus. So in this case, we did a phosphorus, which was 2.1, which was low. So the next step is the evaluation of the metabolic acidosis or alkalosis, and the blood gas showed a pH of 7.12. So we went towards the algorithm, which was persistent with RTA, that is renal tubular acidosis. The next step in the evaluation is to differentiate between the type of RTA, whether it is a proximal or a distal RTA, and urine pH gives us a clue towards possibility. So in this case, urine pH was found to be alkaline, that is 7.4. So the girl who was being treated as a case of recurrent fractures was ultimately diagnosed with distal RTA. And the treatment in this case would be supplementation of adequate amount of alkali, that is sodium bicarbonates. So the key messages from this case is that fractures in a patient indicate distal RTA in rickets. So this should be kept as a possibility in mind. Thank you.
I think the big message is that often if you do textbooks, you find that proximal RTA causes the rickets but not distal RTA. This is not true for India because the presentation is late. We have seen a lot of these patients presenting with severe form of bony deformities and rickets. And as Dr. Neha said, that bicarb is something which will make wonders. And also think of adding thiazides because there will be nephrocalcinosis which is often there by the time they come to us in that situation.
So this 14-year-old boy with refractory rickets, and in photograph there is clear-cut lower limb deformity and X-ray showing rickets. Plus there is some need regulation. So Dr. Chetan, what is the approach for this boy?
So if I describe the picture, the rickets is definitely there on the ulnar bone. Ricketic changes are there, but what striking is the boy is 14-year-old and lower limb is defective. So of course we can say that lower limb is affected more as compared to the upper limb, which is looking quite okay. And the boy is 14-year-old, so definitely we can rule out the nutritional deficiency. So this is a classical presentation of low phosphatemic or hypophosphatemic rickets. Whenever the older age, predominantly lower limb is affected, then we should think of other than the nutritional cause. And in this case, as the slide is showing that phosphate is very low with base excess of -4, that is okay, then the diagnosis goes in favor of hypophosphatemic rickets. So calcium is okay, PTH is we can say low normal. So this is all in collaboration with the hypophosphatemic rickets. In hypophosphatemic rickets, the PTH is normal because the calcium is normal, so PTH is not affected. So key message would be the any older child with predominantly lower limb defect is indicative of hypophosphatemic rickets.
I think that's a big message here that we should think of rickets in two forms, calciopenic and phosphopenic. And if you have predominant lower limb involvement without taking normal calcium, normal PTH, it becomes phosphopenic. And if you treat, then they will have secondary hyperparathyroidism, which will end up not in the beginning. I request all the people to include their this thing unless they are part of the panel discussion. Now the next case.
This 12-day-old girl presented with irritability, and there was dehydration on examination, and calcium level was 18. That was very high. So, Sonal ma'am, what is the approach for this 12-day-old girl with hypocalcemia?
So you should suspect hypercalcemia when patient presents with dehydration, irritability, and encephalopathy. And as the serum calcium level in this child is 80 milligram, more than 12 is considered as hypercalcemia. Now the first step of assessment in this child, after ruling out the history of drugs and immobilization for the prolonged period, we should first do in case of hypercalcemia is parathormone level. And if parathormone level, if it is low, then which is found in this, if it is high or normal, which is found in this case, we must go for urinary calcium level. And if urinary calcium level, if it is normally, we cannot do the total 24, if we cannot do the 24-hour urinary calcium level, we must go for calcium creatinine ratio, and the normal is around 0.25 mg per mg. And in this child, and we should also do the maternal and fathers and mothers urinary calcium level. And if it is found low, then we can suspect the calcium receptor defect. And if it is high, then we should suspect the hyperparathyroidism. In this child, the parathormone level is 120 picogram per ml and calcium creatinine ratio is 0.3 milligram per milligram. So it's suggestive of neonatal severe hyperparathyroidism. So it should be suspected in any child who presents with hypercalcemia and there is a high or normal parathormone level, and always suspect of hyperparathyroidism when the child presents with polyuria, dehydration, irritability or encephalopathy. Thank you.
I think this is a very, very important message by Dr. Sonal that we always think of hypocalcemia, we don't think of hypercalcemia. So there's abdominal pain, dehydration, vomiting, constipation, polyuria, think of hypercalcemia. And newborn form is life-threatening. This is going to die, this child will die if we do not do a corrective surgery at the right time. So very important to pick it up. Next case.
So 2-year-old girl with abdominal pain and ultrasound showed the nephrocalcinosis, and calcium level was 13.6. So high calcium nephrocalcinosis, and phosphorus level was also on higher side. So Dr. Pradeep, what is the approach?
Okay, so in the setting of hypercalcemia with hypercalciuria, most probably we'll keep in mind there is 2 DDs like vitamin D toxicity or hyperparathyroidism. But hyperparathyroidism, phosphate is going against. So this phosphate should be low in hyperparathyroidism, but phosphate here is high 6.2. So we will go for vitamin D status. Here parathyroid is less than 1. Okay. So then, okay, when we see here vitamin D, it is too high, 200 nanogram per ml. So this is definitely a case of vitamin D toxicity, and sometimes we can treat with the steroid also to revert it back. Thank you.
And this is a common presentation we are getting with people taking a lot of vitamin D. They will present with dehydration, irritability, abdominal pain, polyuria, dehydration. Get their calcium and phosphorus, if it's very high, then you can think, as Dr. said, 3 to 6 week course of steroids is what is required, and they will improve. This again is a life-threatening condition, remember. So don't over-prescribe vitamin D and advise patients that you just stick to these medications. They will often take sachets for weeks, and people have died because of this. So this is a severe complication we all should be aware. As pediatricians, of course as pediatric endocrinologists, but definitely at a pediatrician level, this is something which you have to be very careful. When we are giving vitamin D, tell them this is only for this duration, this dose, don't exceed. It can cause huge problems.
So this 4-day-old boy presented with seizure and birth weight was 3.2 kg. There was history of the perinatal asphyxia. His calcium level was 18 and phosphorus level was normal, 4.2. And PTH was undetectable. So what could be the cause of this hypercalcemia in this boy, Dr. Chetan?
So this is a neonate with definite hypercalcemia with adequate suppression of PTH. So it looks like a PTH independent cause of hypercalcemia, which is causing high calcium. So next step would be to think in terms of high vitamin D or high calcitriol level. Plus, asphyxia is suggestive of difficult labor. So this is quite common in case of newborn. And as we see that 25-hydroxy-D is normal, but calcitriol is way high. The upper limit of the calcitriol is 90 to 100, and this is so way high calcitriol. So vitamin D is normal, but it is activated excessively into calcitriol, which is driving our hypercalcemia. And we examined the newborn, and we found the palpable nodule in form of the subcutaneous fat necrosis. So this is very common but often neglected in NICU practice. In case of asphyxia or difficult labor, if the calcium is turning high, then we should examine the newborn properly again and again to find the palpable nodule in form of subcutaneous fat necrosis. And the treatment is again depending on the level with proper hydration and steroid as well as Lasix. So we should consider fat necrosis in a newborn with high calcium and particularly in positive history of asphyxia or difficult labor.
And they are very easily identifiable. If you think of it, you will see them as a big nodule which is there. They look like violaceous nodule. So very easy to identify, very easy diagnosis, but missed, as Dr. Chetan said. I think this is the last case, a very interesting case.
Of the 3-year-old boy with presented with bone pain, and the routine calcium profile was done, which showed the calcium level of 14.4 and phosphorus is normal, and treatment was undetectable. On further investigation, we found that 25 OHD level is sufficient, but calcitriol level is also low.
So now we have high calcium with no PTH, no vitamin D. So there is the calcium coming from there in this case.
So if we go by our physiology, the two main hormones regulating the level of calcium in blood are vitamin D and PTH. So as we see from the evaluation, PTH is undetectable and vitamin D as well as the activated form of vitamin D, calcitriol, is also normal. So the most important element that will give us the clue would be phosphorus in this case. So assuming the phosphorus level to be low or high, the case gives us towards that there is some extra parathyroid secretion. So we did perform X-ray in this case, which showed us lytic lesions, giving us a possibility of malignancy. So there was a bone aspiration planned in this child, which showed lymphoblast, and a diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia was made. So the case emphasizes on the role of phosphorus in the child who presents with hypercalcemia. So the key messages would be that malignancy should be considered a possibility if we have low parathyroid and low vitamin D in the presence of high calcium and low to normal phosphorus levels.
I think this is a big message because a lot of these adults present to us with neoplastic hypercalcemia, that is PTH related peptide related, but in children often it is because of these lytic lesions in which you are getting this calcium out of the system. And often this may be the first manifestation of ALN. I think you also saw a case just like this,
yes.
And it was been going on for some time. So if you have hypercalcemia, it is rare, but it has got something inside. It could be hyperthyroidism, it could be vitamin D toxicity, this could be acute leukemia. So all those situations you have to be very, very wary about when you are evaluating child with hypercalcemia. I think that's a very big message which is there. Role of calcium supplementation in newborn baby to counteract physiological hypocalcemia. Now, basically, calcium deficiency does not cause hypocalcemia in the newborns. Vitamin D deficiency does not cause hypocalcemia in the first 3 weeks of life. So, if you start vitamin D in the first 2 weeks, that should be enough. So, unless somebody is premature, you do not need to really give them calcium or phosphorus in that regard. Breast milk will have huge amount. Dr. Hemant is asking from Patna PMCH, should we start calcium in all HI baby? I think the key message would be to monitor their calcium levels, look for symptoms, and then go from there. Dr. Pinky is saying that though magnesium is needed for release of PTH, why IV calcium is not improving serum calcium and correcting seizures? Dr. Pinky, the answer to that is very simple, that magnesium is actually going to have a long-term effect. So if you give calcium, levels will go up. But if you actually stop, the levels will come down again. So the root cause is magnesium deficiency, which needs to be corrected in that regards. Dr. Modika is asking about formulation of oral magnesium supplements. So usually we use milk of magnesia. Sometimes we actually use magnesium sulfate also in that form. We don't have very easily available preparations in that regards. Dr. Manar, again the same question. So milk of magnesia is a good, it's an antacid, so you can use it in that regards. Dr. Vidya is asking about a girl with 12-year-old girl with hypophosphatemia rickets on calcitriol and liquid phosphorus. Apart from monitoring calcium, ALP and KTH, is there anything we can do to prevent phosphatemia? Now this is a very, very interesting question. Now hypophosphatemic rickets is a very challenging condition to treat. Often you will never be able to normalize phosphorus. If you give too much phosphorus, you will cause hypocalcemia, you will cause hyperparathyroidism. So other things would be to restrict salt. In that regards, now we have got the specific antibodies which are available for monoclonal antibody, borosumab, which can be used in that regards. But this is a very, very difficult situation to treat. Dr. Ashish Bajaj is that refractory should be considered after 2 doses of failure to vitamin D after 6 lakhs. So this is good. But now since we talk about daily doses also, so I would say 6 to 8 weeks of daily doses could also be considered. Dr. Hari Kumar, how to monitor the adequacy of treatment in rickets after giving full course of vitamin D by 25 OHD or by ALP levels. Dr. Hari Kumar, the next thing you look at is the line of healing. If there is no line of healing, then you go ahead in other things in terms of evaluation. ALP levels may take up to 2 to 3 months to come down to normal, so you can monitor it later on. Vitamin D level, we don't routinely do it. We can probably supplement vitamin D subsequently, but if you're having a doubt, then you do all those things in that regard. So